"You can sit here if you want," a single mom said to a lonely billionaire. Miles Harrington sat alone at a quiet restaurant table, staring at the empty chair across from him as if it carried an answer he wasn't ready to hear. His phone lay face up beside his plate, the message already read, already accepted. Sorry, not coming. He wasn't angry. He wasn't surprised. He just felt that familiar heaviness settle in, the one that came when plans failed and silence took over again. He checked his watch out of habit, not because he needed to be anywhere else, but because it gave him something to do with his hands. Around him, conversations flowed easily, laughter rose and fell, and life seemed to move forward without effort. Miles felt separate from it, like someone watching through glass. He reached for his jacket, ready to leave quietly, the way he always did when things didn't work out. That was when a calm voice interrupted his exit. "You can sit here if you want." Miles froze. He turned and saw Claire Anderson looking at him without curiosity or pity, simply making space. She didn't explain herself. She didn't smile too much. She just pointed to the empty chair at her table and went back to her dessert, leaving the choice entirely in his hands. If you believe in compassion and the quiet strength of ordinary people, take a moment to like and subscribe. Stories like this remind us how one small act can change everything. For a brief moment, Miles realized how rarely anyone offered him something without expectation. No questions, no pressure, just a seat and the option to stay. He looked at the door, then at the chair, and felt the weight of 100 moments where he had chosen to walk away. Slowly, he sat down, unaware that this small decision was already changing the direction of his life. Claire Anderson hadn't planned on company that night. She was an attorney, a single mother, and someone who had learned to appreciate rare moments of quiet when they appeared. Her dinner meeting had ended earlier than expected, and instead of rushing home, she stayed for dessert, enjoying a few minutes of stillness before returning to a house full of energy and questions. Lily and Emma, her 8-year-old twins, were with their babysitter, and for once, nothing was pulling her in two directions. Miles sat across from her now, unsure of how he'd ended up there. He didn't offer details about himself, and Claire didn't ask. What struck her wasn't mystery, but restraint. He spoke carefully, as if used to weighing words before letting them leave his mouth. There was no attempt to impress her, no performance. That absence of effort felt refreshing in a way she hadn't realized she needed. Miles explained, vaguely, that he worked a lot, and wasn't especially good at social situations unless there was a clear purpose. Claire smiled at that, recognizing the truth behind it. She shared that her life was full of people and responsibility, but that solitude had become something she guarded fiercely. They weren't exchanging resumes or backstories. They were simply talking, letting the conversation find its own pace. The restaurant faded into the background as they spoke. Neither of them rushed. Neither checked their phones. Claire noticed how Miles listened, not with the intent to respond, but to understand. It made her slow down too. For the first time in a while, she felt like she didn't need to manage the moment. She could just exist in it. Miles felt the shift as well. Sitting there, he realized how often people approached him with hidden expectations. Claire had none. She hadn't asked who he was, what he did, or what he could offer. That simplicity settled something inside him. It reminded him of how rare it was to be included without conditions. As the conversation continued, Miles felt an unfamiliar sense of ease. Not excitement, not anticipation, just calm. And somewhere in that calm was a quiet awareness that this night, accidental as it seemed, was already separating itself from all the others that had come before. He didn't yet know why, only that he wasn't ready for it to end. As the conversation settled into a comfortable rhythm, Miles glanced at his watch again out of habit, then stopped himself. Claire noticed the movement and didn't comment on it right away. Instead, she finished her sentence, took a slow breath, and then said something gently, without judgment, that caught him off guard. She told him he didn't have to keep checking the time if he didn't want to. The words weren't sharp or corrective. They were simple, almost protective, and they landed deeper than she intended. Miles felt a quiet shift inside him, the kind that happens when someone names a behavior you didn't realize you were using as armor. He admitted, with a small, self-aware smile, that he checked the time when he felt unsure of where he belonged. It was easier than admitting discomfort. Claire didn't laugh or minimize it. She nodded, as if that made perfect sense, because to her, it did. In that moment, Miles felt seen in a way he wasn't used to, not as an achievement, but as a person navigating something uncomfortable. Claire shared, in return, that she often stayed busy for the same reason. Between work, parenting, and responsibility, motion had become her refuge. Slowing down felt dangerous sometimes, like if she stopped moving, everything she'd been holding together might finally demand attention. Saying it out loud surprised her. She hadn't planned to be that honest with a stranger. But something about the way Miles listened made it feel safe to leave the thought unfinished, hanging between them. The bond forming wasn't dramatic. There were no confessions or grand gestures. It was the quiet recognition of two people admitting, in small pieces, that they were tired of carrying things alone. Miles realized that sitting at this table had already changed the night in a way no blind date ever had. He wasn't trying to impress Claire, and she wasn't trying to assess him. That absence of expectation was doing something powerful. It was lowering defenses he hadn't known how to put down before. When Miles finally spoke again, his voice was steadier, more grounded. He mentioned a situation at work, framed vaguely, about a decision that felt technically correct but emotionally wrong. He didn't ask for advice outright. He just described the tension. Claire listened carefully, then offered a perspective rooted not in numbers, but in impact. She talked about long-term trust, about how people remember how they're treated when no one is watching. Miles felt something settle inside him. A direction, maybe. That was the moment the evening crossed an invisible line. What had started as a shared table became a shared concern, a shared moment of choosing differently. Miles realized that he wasn't just enjoying the conversation, he was being influenced by it. Claire's calm clarity was pushing him toward a version of himself he rarely gave room to exist. And the surprising part was that it didn't feel threatening. It felt grounding. As the plates were cleared and the restaurant lights dimmed slightly, Miles hesitated, then asked Claire if she would be willing to continue the conversation another time. Not as a date, not with labels, but as someone whose perspective mattered. Claire considered it for a moment, thinking about her schedule, her daughters, her already full life. Then she agreed, setting a boundary about timing that Miles accepted without question. That respect mattered more to her than she expected. They stood to leave soon after, neither rushing, neither lingering too long. Outside the restaurant, the night air felt cooler, sharper, more real. Miles walked toward his car, aware that something small but irreversible had just begun. He didn't know what form it would take or where it would lead. He only knew that choosing to sit had already altered the trajectory of his life. And that realization stayed with him, quietly opening the next door. After that night, the quiet returned to both of them, but it no longer felt the same. Miles went back to his routine, the meetings, the constant pressure to decide quickly and move on. Yet something in him resisted the speed. He replayed the conversation with Claire more than once, not because of what was said, but because of how it felt to be heard without being measured. That feeling unsettled him. Slowing down had always been uncomfortable, and now it felt unavoidable. Claire, meanwhile, felt the familiar weight of responsibility settle back onto her shoulders the moment she stepped into her house. Lily and Emma ran to her with stories, questions, and laughter that filled every corner of the room. She smiled, hugged them, and listened, but part of her mind lingered on the evening before. Not in a romantic way, but in a reflective one. She realized how rare it had been to sit with another adult without needing to manage, fix, or anticipate the next demand. Over the next few days, Miles noticed how isolated his world truly was. He was surrounded by capable people, but none of them knew him beyond his function. Decisions landed on his desk, heavy and final, without space for doubt or emotion. The more he thought about it, the clearer it became that he had built a life where vulnerability had no practical use. That realization didn't make him angry. It made him tired in a deeper way than before. Claire experienced her own form of dissent. Balancing work and motherhood left little room for uncertainty, yet uncertainty was exactly what surfaced. She questioned whether she had learned to stay strong at the expense of being open. She wondered when being capable had slowly replaced being supported. Sitting alone at night after the girls were asleep, she admitted to herself that she rarely allowed anyone close enough to see her hesitate. That awareness felt heavy, but also honest. When Miles and Claire spoke again, briefly and intentionally, there was a noticeable shift. The ease was still there, but beneath it ran something more fragile. Miles confessed that the decision he had mentioned was weighing on him more than expected. He hadn't slept well. Claire listened, sensing that this wasn't about business anymore. It was about carrying responsibility without anyone to lean on. She didn't offer solutions. She acknowledged the loneliness of having to be the final answer. That acknowledgement cracked something open in Miles. He admitted, quietly, that he didn't know how to ask for help without feeling weak. It was a statement he hadn't planned to say out loud. Claire understood immediately. She shared that she struggled with the same thing, just in a different context. Between them, there was no comparison of pain, no hierarchy of struggle. Just two people recognizing the cost of being the one others depend on. The days that followed felt heavier instead of lighter, which surprised them both. The connection they'd formed hadn't solved anything. It had exposed what they had been avoiding. For Miles, it was the emptiness behind his success. For Claire, it was the exhaustion behind her strength. Neither of them knew yet what to do with that awareness. They only knew it had changed the way they moved through their days. As they stood on the edge of that vulnerability, both sensed that something had to give. Staying exactly the same no longer felt possible, but neither was ready to leap into something undefined. The bond they'd formed was beginning to ask something of them, not in demands, but in honesty. And that quiet tension lingered, waiting for the moment when one small choice would push everything forward. The shift came quietly, the way real changes usually do. Miles invited Claire to meet with his team under the pretense of a preliminary consultation, framing it as a chance to look at a complex agreement that didn't sit right with him. Claire hesitated at first, not because she lacked confidence, but because she understood the weight of stepping into someone else's world. When she agreed, it was with clear boundaries and a calm certainty that this was not about impressing anyone. It was about doing the work the right way. Walking into the conference room the next morning, Claire felt a familiar mix of focus and restraint settle in. She scanned the faces around the table, prepared to establish professional distance, when she locked eyes with Jonathan Reed. The recognition was instant and disarming. They hadn't seen each other since law school, back when ambition felt lighter and life less complicated. Jonathan's surprise mirrored hers, followed by an easy warmth that reminded her of a time before responsibility shaped every interaction. The meeting itself revealed more than Claire expected. As she reviewed the documents, it became clear that the proposed partnership would bring significant profit, but at a quiet cost to smaller clients who would have little recourse once the deal closed. The room grew tense as Claire articulated the long-term implications in clear, practical language. She wasn't accusing anyone. She was laying out consequences. Miles watched closely, noticing how she spoke with firmness without aggression, conviction without arrogance. For the first time in years, Miles felt conflicted in a way that couldn't be resolved by numbers alone. Claire's analysis forced him to confront a truth he had avoided, that growth, when unchecked, could erode the very trust his company was built on. Jonathan supported her perspective, recalling their shared values from years earlier. The room shifted. What had seemed like a routine approval meeting became a moment of reckoning, one that asked more than efficiency. After the meeting, Miles pulled Claire aside, not to thank her, but to admit something he rarely said. He told her he had felt uneasy about the deal from the start, but didn't know how to articulate it without sounding weak or indecisive. Claire listened, recognizing the courage it took to say that. She reminded him that leadership wasn't about always being certain. Sometimes it was about slowing down long enough to listen to doubt before it became regret. Jonathan later joined them, the conversation drifting toward their shared history. There was no nostalgia for its own sake, just an acknowledgement that some connections endure because they were built on honesty. Claire felt a subtle but important realization settle in. This wasn't just about helping a company. It was about aligning work with values she cared deeply about. That alignment felt grounding, even as it complicated her already full life. Miles returned to his office that afternoon with a weight on his chest that felt different from pressure. It felt like responsibility stripped of ego. He knew delaying or restructuring the deal would upset powerful people. He also knew that ignoring what Claire had shown him would cost something far more personal. The choice in front of him was no longer abstract. It was moral. and it demanded a response that couldn't be delegated. As the day ended, Miles stood alone in his office, city lights stretching endlessly below him. He realized that inviting Claire into his professional world had done more than provide clarity. It had exposed the gap between who he was and who he wanted to be. The realization didn't offer comfort. It offered direction. And somewhere in that clarity, a new question formed, quietly challenging everything he thought he understood about success. Miles didn't announce his decision like it was a victory. He called a smaller follow-up meeting, asked fewer people to join, and started with the simplest sentence he could manage. He told them the partnership would not move forward as written. There was a pause that felt like someone had turned down the air in the room. A few executives exchanged looks, already calculating what the delay would cost in headlines, in investor confidence, in quarterly projections. Miles stayed calm, because for the first time, calm felt more powerful than speed. Claire sat slightly back from the table, watching the dynamics shift. She had seen rooms like this before, where the loudest voice usually won and risk was treated like a math problem instead of a human one. But Miles surprised her. He didn't blame anyone, didn't frame it as a moral lecture, didn't try to sound heroic. He asked questions that forced the room to slow down. Who would this hurt? How would we explain it to a small client who trusted us? What kind of company are we building if the easiest wins come from people who can't push back? Jonathan backed him with a steadiness that felt personal, not political. He didn't argue to dominate the room either. He supported Miles by giving context, reminding the team of the company's early days, when trust was the product and not just a slogan. Claire noticed how Jonathan looked at Miles when no one else was watching, like he was quietly relieved to see him choosing something harder but cleaner. It made her wonder how long Jonathan had been waiting for Miles to step into that version of leadership. The pushback came fast, not cruel, but firm. A senior advisor warned that competitors would take advantage, that walking away now would look like weakness. Someone else argued that small clients were replaceable, that the market wouldn't care. Claire felt her jaw tighten, but she didn't jump in. This wasn't her fight. This was Miles's moment to prove he meant what he said, not with speeches, but with follow-through. She could almost feel the tension in his shoulders as he stayed measured. Miles didn't raise his voice. He didn't threaten jobs. He didn't play power games. He simply repeated that they were going to rebuild the agreement to protect the people who couldn't protect themselves. And then, he did something unexpected. He asked Claire to outline the minimum ethical standards she would require if she were advising a family-owned business, not a billion-dollar company. It shifted the conversation immediately. Suddenly, everyone had to think like a person, not a machine. Claire laid it out plainly, using simple language that anyone could follow. Transparency, fair exit clauses, a clear path for disputes, no hidden fees, no traps that only lawyers could find. She spoke without drama, because the truth didn't need drama. It was obvious once it was said. Miles listened like a student, not a boss, and that posture changed the energy in the room. It didn't make everyone agree, but it made it harder for anyone to dismiss the human cost as irrelevant. After the meeting, Miles stayed behind with Jonathan and Claire. The room was quiet now, the kind of quiet that comes after a hard choice has been made. Miles admitted he felt like he had just stepped in front of a moving train and decided not to flinch. Jonathan told him he hadn't seen him do that in a long time, maybe ever. Claire didn't praise him. She simply said she respected the choice, because it meant he was willing to lose money to keep his integrity intact. That afternoon, Miles made the counterattack real. He authorized a separate budget to create a client protection team, not for marketing, but for accountability. He asked Jonathan to oversee it, and asked Claire to help design it. It was the kind of decision that would never look exciting on a press release, but would change lives quietly over years. And as Claire left the building, she realized something that unsettled her in the best way. This wasn't a one-time act of kindness. Miles was building a new pattern. The only question was what that pattern would demand from all of them next. Miles didn't expect the invitation to feel as heavy as it did. Claire hadn't framed it as anything special, just mentioned that Lily and Emma had a small school event and that Jonathan would be there too. It wasn't a formal thing, no suits, no speeches, just something the kids were excited about. Miles almost declined out of habit. This wasn't his world. but something in him recognized that this was exactly why he needed to go. So he showed up quietly, early, and took a seat in the back. The room was crowded with parents holding phones, coffee cups, and tired smiles. Children moved nervously, clutching papers and whispering lines they were afraid to forget. Miles sat still, feeling oddly exposed without a role to play. No one knew who he was, and no one cared. He watched Claire move through the room, greeting other parents, adjusting the girls' hair, kneeling to their level when they spoke. There was competence in her movements, but also tenderness. It wasn't performative, it was practiced love. When Lily and Emma spotted Miles, their faces lit up with surprised smiles. They waved enthusiastically, unconcerned with whether he fit in or not. Claire noticed too, her expression softening for just a moment. Miles felt something tighten in his chest. He wasn't used to being welcomed without context. He leaned forward slightly as the event began, fully present, resisting the urge to check his phone. For once, nothing else felt urgent. As the children took turns presenting, Miles found himself clapping harder than he meant to. He laughed when others laughed, felt the awkward pauses, the pride, the relief when each child finished. It was small and imperfect and deeply human. Sitting there, Miles realized how much of life he had been watching from a distance. This wasn't about success or impact at scale. This was about showing up, even when nothing tangible came from it. Afterward, as parents gathered coats and children ran around, Claire introduced Miles casually, without titles. Jonathan chatted nearby, comfortable, familiar. The girls pulled Miles toward a table where their drawings were displayed, explaining every detail with seriousness only children have. Miles listened carefully, asking questions, letting them lead. He didn't rush them. He didn't glance at his watch. He let the moment stretch as long as it needed to. On the drive home, Lily sat quietly in the back seat for a while, then spoke, without looking up. She said Miles was good at listening. The words were simple, offered without awareness of their weight. Claire glanced at Miles in the mirror, curious how he would react. Miles didn't respond right away. The statement landed somewhere deep, bypassing all the defenses he'd built over the years. He had been praised for leadership, vision, discipline, but this felt different. This felt like being named. Later that night, alone in his apartment, Miles replayed the day in fragments. The noise of the room, the sound of clapping, the way the girls spoke when they felt safe. He realized how rarely anyone described him in terms of how he made them feel, rather than what he accomplished. The realization was unsettling, but also grounding. It suggested a version of himself that existed beyond outcomes and metrics. As he sat with that awareness, Miles understood that this connection had crossed into something deeper than professional respect or casual friendship. He didn't know what it would become, and he didn't rush to define it. But he knew one thing with clarity he hadn't felt in years. Being present had changed him, and there was no way to go back to who he had been before. What that change would demand next was still unclear, but it was already asking him to stay. The weeks that followed brought pressure from every direction, not as a dramatic confrontation, but as a steady accumulation of doubts, expectations, and quiet resistance. Inside the company, Miles began to feel the weight of his earlier decision in practical ways. Meetings took longer, negotiations became slower, and certain investors questioned whether his leadership had softened. None of it was openly hostile, but the message underneath was clear. Kindness was acceptable, as long as it didn't interfere with momentum. Miles felt the tension of that contradiction every single day. Claire experienced her own version of that strain, balancing her work with Miles's company. Her growing closeness to Jonathan and the constant needs of Lily and Emma left little room to breathe. She felt pulled between worlds that all demanded her best self at the same time. Some nights, after the girls were asleep, she questioned whether she was stretching herself too thin. Being strong had always been her default, but now strength required discernment. She didn't want to lose herself in the process of supporting everyone else. Jonathan noticed the shift before either of them named it. He saw how Claire carried the load without complaint, and how Miles absorbed criticism without deflecting it. Jonathan stood between them in different ways, sometimes as a partner, sometimes as a bridge. He reminded Miles that leadership didn't mean isolation, and he reminded Claire that she didn't have to hold everything together alone. His presence was steady, but even he felt the pressure of what was changing around them. Outside forces continued to test their resolve. A delayed contract caused unrest among employees, and rumors circulated quietly about whether the company had lost its edge. Miles addressed the concerns honestly, refusing to dress uncertainty up as confidence. He spoke about values, about sustainability, about trust that outlived quarterly reports. Some people respected it,